That is the elevation line. Welcome everyone to our weekly Stories from Open Space civic conversation. Just a couple minutes before we get started here. Actually, it's 2:30 right now, so we'll get right into it. We wanted to let everybody know that our newsletter, we've launched a weekly newsletter. It is coming out on Tuesdays. So if you are not receiving that and you'd like to subscribe, you can visit storiesfromopenspace.org. There's a subscription link right at the top of the page. One additional new feature we introduced this week in our newsletter and will be featured in upcoming civic conversations is our Living with Wilderness series, where we'll be focused on present day issues in our first wilderness communities and how we can work towards improving quality of life and focusing on community development and recreation projects throughout our first wilderness towns. And now I will turn it over to Dan.
Thanks very much. Yes, if you go to storiesfromopenspace.org, you'll see that we have a new homepage now that displays all of our content at a glance. And so you can see our collaborative history and development, stories related to that. You'll see our first Living with Wilderness story. You'll see our trip reports, and we also have a new feature now. Each week we're going to run a different cover photo, inviting the public to submit photos of places in Warren County, especially Western Warren County, that have special meaning to them. So this is all part of our effort to aggregate content, crowdsource content from lots of different people. Now that we have technologies like Zoom and Trent that allows us to transcribe these conversations very rapidly and work with text in a way that we never could before. Basecamp, which allows us all to get together and write collaboratively. So we've been learning a lot through this process. One thing that we're going to start focusing on more now is to develop more specific stories. We've been doing these long civic conversations and asking our students. Mae Bratton is here. She's been writing a lot of these stories for us. We say to her, okay, here are 9,000 words in this transcript, boil it down to 2,000 and we'll run it. Now we're looking at more shorter stories. We'll be able to cover a broader range of topics. And one of the stories that we're going to be focusing on today is one that we started last week with Jim Schaefer when we were looking at the art of rock slicing, the amazing work that Vince Schaefer did using the technology made possible by the artificial diamond. Suddenly it became possible to cut rock, and it turns out when you cut rock, it becomes translucent and it looks like stained glass. So we'll be focusing on that, but we're also going to be looking at Carl Schaefer, the third brother, along with Vince and Paul, this remarkable Schaefer family. We're going to learn more about Carl and his life up there in North Creek, especially, and what he did to open up the ski community there in North Creek at Gore Mountain. So to take us through that, we're delighted to have Greg Schaefer and Ellen Schaefer. And we'll just start asking a lot of questions. And our tradition is to have our student ask the first question. So Mae, I'll turn it over to you. But before I do that, I have to make sure I turn on the Zoom recording. We're recording this in two places. We're recording it on YouTube, of course, but we also need to record it in Zoom. So I have to remember to do that, and I will find it here. Mae, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dan. So first, just a introductory question for both Ellen and Greg. If you could just give us a brief overview of your lives from the first realization of what you knew you wanted to do in life to what you had for breakfast this morning.
Well, generally I have some cereal and some toast for breakfast. So that's that first question. And Ellen, she likes to have her cereal also. When I talk about what I wanted to do in life, I think that, like so many other people, it grew over time. I actually went off to college and I was in the seminary for a year, but that I realized wasn't exactly what I wanted to do with my life, but I was interested in education. And that's a field that many people in the Schaefer family have gone into. So I was very inspired by one of my Spanish professors in college. I had no intention of going into Spanish when I first started out, but my interest certainly grew. And so I became a certified Spanish teacher. And along the way, I also picked up certification in English. And through my career, I was a Spanish English teacher in various settings. I was in the city. I taught 8 years in the Adirondacks, which were absolutely wonderful back in the 70s into the early 80s. And I finished my career at Shenendehowa High School as an administrator in languages and ESL. And what I found is even in my administration role, I was spending a lot of time teaching because I was working with a lot of teachers in a lot of different areas. And I just found that to be very rewarding. And I'm now retired. I retired in 2012, and that is the best job I have ever had.
And probably the busiest one he's ever had. Trying to find time to fit things in. Actually, early in my career, I went into nursing, and I am a registered nurse, retired, but I tended to like the administration side of things more than the direct patient care. So I went back to school and got a bachelor's degree in business administration, healthcare administration, and worked at Albany Medical College, several other healthcare settings. At one point, for a few years, I was the director of an adult home for people with dementia. Probably throughout all of that, I did a lot of teaching. I taught, I did nurses aid training and things like that. But after my father passed away, I had taken a leave for 6 years when my mother died to take care of my father, who had Alzheimer's or dementia, and went back to work. And I was very fortunate that I got a job as a senior education specialist with the Research Foundation at SUNY Albany, training trainers who trained the people that work in child daycare. And I found that talking to adults, educating adults was the thing I liked the best. On a vacation to Cape Cod many years ago, we visited a few museums and got talking to one of the volunteer docents and decided way back then, probably 20, 30 years ago, that when we retired, we were going to do that. We were going to volunteer at a museum. And here we are at the Depot Museum now. I currently serve as president of the board of trustees. Greg is also a board member. And we do a lot of fundraising, of course, because we are a not-for-profit 501c3 charitable organization. But what we really enjoy is bringing the history of the area to life and the people that we meet in the process. So I'll throw in one other little tidbit about the Schaefers. Next month, we will celebrate our 49th wedding anniversary. We've made it this far, so hopefully we'll make it to 50.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We may ask you to elaborate a little more on the Schaefer family in general. One of the things that's been fascinating here is as we look at this collaborative history that we're producing among some other projects, which were a working title is the Schaefers of Cabin Country. We're learning a lot about the whole Schaefer family. It's just a fascinating story over many generations. What I'd like you to focus on for the next few minutes, if you would, is specifically about Carl. We've learned a lot about some other members of the family. So Greg and Ellen, if both of you would just tell us more about Carl and how he fits into the whole story of cabin country and the kind of history of that area, that would be a great place to start the next part of the conversation here.
Yep. So when I think of my father, I think of someone who was pretty much universally admired. My father was a kind of a quiet man, but he was extremely clever, extremely resourceful, and he just had this native ability to do things, to build things, and to repair things. And when I reflect on his life and the parts of his life that I know, he would share stories of his growing up, and he would throw out anecdotes like Uncle Paul Schaefer would be having difficulty with his car or his truck or whatever, and Dad would be there to get out and start the car and get him on his way, because Dad knew how to fix things. And through his life, they never had a lot of money. I'm sure you realize that Vince left high school. I don't think Paul finished high school, so they could help support the family. To my knowledge, Dad did graduate from high school, and we'll get into the rest of that story later on. But he had this ability to do things, and one of the things that comes to mind right away is that in their house on St. Augustine Avenue in Schenectady, he built a fireplace in the basement. When he was
10, 12.
He was in his teenage years. The family, they got their cabin in Baker's Mills after going up and renting a place for a couple of summers. My grandmother had pretty bad asthma, so they went to the Adirondacks from May to October, and the heck was school. They actually did attend school in Baker's Mills for like one day. It did not work out very well, but they were learning other things in cabin country. And when they eventually got the cabin that Grandpa Schaefer named Craigerole for Crane, Gore, 11th, and Heideland Mountains, Craigerole, Dad built a fireplace there. They also built beautiful bunk beds made out of yellow birch. So he was always fixing, creating, and making things. If you have a Carl Schaefer fireplace in your home, you are a very lucky person, because these are beautiful works of art, beautiful stonework. I helped him, just like my brothers. I don't think my sister got on too many masonry jobs, but we are always putting up the scaffolding, taking down the scaffolding, carrying the bricks, carrying the cement, mixing the cement. And so on a weekend or during the summers, we had our time filled with whatever project Dad had. And he worked full-time at the GE as we were growing up. That was his bread and butter job, as he called it, but he always had these side jobs going on. And if we weren't doing that, we were up at ski land in the Adirondacks in North Creek.
And interesting, you said he was a very gentle man. When I was dating Greg, Carl was working on the limestone facade of the library in Schoharie that Paul was building. And one of the days, if I wanted to see him on a weekend, I had to go down there and to the job and to see him. But one day we got down there and I asked him why one corner of one wall was left unfinished. And he said, take a closer look. So climb up the scaffolding to look. And there was a nest and it had baby birds in it. And he would not disturb them until they had left the nest. And so he left the wall the way it was and went on to another section, until they left. So, someone else might have just knocked the nest off the wall, but not Carl.
And Dad was a teacher himself. We'll talk more about skiing later on, I'm sure. But he would always be showing, teaching, whatever. I think a good example of that is in the late 40s or into the early 50s, Dad was a Boy Scout leader. And I just want to share something quick. Larry Wilkie was one of Dad's Boy Scouts. Larry Wilkie and his wife, Sally, they both are turning 90. Larry turned 90 in February and Sally's turning 90 this week or next week. And Ellen is quite the crafts lady, and she was doing a lot of glass etching. And a couple of years ago, she gave Larry a pint glass with that ski logo on it.
Right, from the North Creek Ski School.
From the North Creek Ski School, which Ann Gertrude designed back in the 1930s. These stories keep circling back upon themselves, of course. And Larry wrote, Father Finn of St. John's asked Carl to establish a Boy Scout troop to share his love of nature with the kids of the parish and their intercity buddies who really needed direction in their young lives. Carl accepted the challenge and put his faith to work. In looking back, it's hard to imagine how he found the days and hours in his busy family life to take us to so many places and to encourage us to work on merit badges, always expanding our knowledge and interests. Many, for the first time, learned to canoe, climb mountains, ski, cut Christmas trees up north. And when I'm asked how I learned to telemark, I so proudly reply, Carl Schaefer taught me 70 years ago, right here on Gore Mountain. So that's the kind of legacy that Dad left.
Well, that's really interesting to me, Greg. And before we move into the skiing, I wanted to follow up just with one maybe brief question. It sounds to me like growing up as a Schaefer with this really close family, it seems almost that there was an ethos that went with the family about nature, about respect for nature, about being self-sufficient. How would you reflect on that?
Well, I go back to the days at Craigrowell in the summertime. They brought the family up there and they had a lot of time in their hands. So what did they do? They went out and hunted, they fished, they had campfires together. I have a picture of my father. He must be in his late teens, and he's holding up a string of fish. Now, my father never, ever, ever took me fishing because by the time I came along, he wasn't fishing. But that's
Number 5 of 6.
But I know stories of they would go back to Second Pond to fish, or they would go back to Botheration Pond that I mentioned before to fish. Dave Gibson knows how close 11th Mountain is to Camp Craigrowell. He said my dad said he could climb 11th in 20 minutes from the cabin. I would never doubt my father, but that's quite a climb. So that's the kind of thing they were doing. They were exploring. They were on the edge of the Siamese Ponds wilderness, and they did a lot of exploration because it was just beautiful country. And the woods were different then because they had been logged off. You could see vast distances from a lot of these places because a lot of the trees had been cut down. It was quite a time they had. And of course, they would bring a lot of food with them. My grandmother would can food ahead of time and bring things up, but I'm sure they ate a lot of things that were available to them up there, the small game and, that was legal, and, the fish and all that kind of stuff to have on the table there. But once again, they didn't have a lot of money, so they did with what they could. And, there was an organ in the camp. My grandmother Schaefer was the organist for St. Madeline Sophie Church down in Schenectady. And she was organist there for quite a while. And I know I heard some place where they got the pump organ from, but there was a pump organ in Craigrowell, and she would play and they would sing and have a great time there.
It
His
sounds like
father was,
Sorry,
he
go
was
ahead.
quite a firm believer that the balsams did everything to help her asthma. And in fact, I also suffer from asthma. That was one of the things he said to me, is you got to spend more time in the woods. I'm sure industrialized Schenectady back in the 20s is why she had to get out and get into the mountains. But Yeah, I grew up in Albany, and I was not someone who had spent any time up here at all until I met Greg. And so it was quite an experience for me in the beginning, because I said I was a city kid.
Yeah, you became part of a very interesting family, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Greg,
Dan, over to you.
yeah. At an early age, Carl decided he would stay in Cabot Country. Did he move to North Creek and settle down there while Paul and Vince decided to settle in Schenectady? I guess I just wanted spatially what happened when they were young men. What happened?
Well, when he established the ski business, that's when he started spending extended times up there. I think most people have heard the story that in 1935, Bill Gleasing from the GE House of Magic, who was Dad's friend, who was Dad's mentor, he said, "Carl, here's $100, go to North Creek and build a rope tow." Now, I know that they had gone from Vermont to Woodstock the previous winter to look at a rope tow there. What was going on in their back of the minds at that point, I'm not really sure, but certainly they wouldn't go all the way to Vermont for nothing. But, and there are calculators. You can see that the $100 that Bill gave him was quite a bit of money in our money. So anyway, Carl went up and with the help of Johnny Morehouse from Baker's Mills, who was one of his friends from all their time they spent up there, and with the assistance of the Alexander's garage in town, he had a rope tow running by December 20th of 1935. And that was a pretty good ski year. The following winter, next winter, he had purchased a piece of property over on what is now Peaceful Valley Road, but Peaceful Valley Road didn't exactly exist at that point. But he bought a piece of property. He ended up with 140 acres, and he established Schaefer's Ski Land, which had a rope tow. It had a hostel. It had the Carl Schaefer North Creek Ski School, and that went on for several years, and he would have extended times up there during the winter. And I'm thinking that, during the summer times, the off season, he'd be back in Schenectady working with Paul building.
Okay.
So now he was certainly involved with the skiing previous to that, because we know for a fact, because we have a 16 millimeter film, of course, been digitized, of the first snow train, which was March 4th, 1934. And Dad is standing on the platform and buzzing around, making sure people have whatever they need and are getting on the train. So they were certainly all involved in the skiing, the snow trains back in the early 30s.
So do we know how Carl got interested in skiing in the first place? Did Irving Langmuir have anything to do with it? I mean, as I read the history of John Apperson and Langmuir, it sounds as though they were kind of early pioneers in skiing. Langmuir, he was a skier. He brought it from Europe. I don't know if he taught Apperson. Maybe Ellen can shed some light on that. But anyway, somehow skiing became a thing. And then we had there's the Schenectady Winter Sports Club. There's the Hudson Valley Hiking Club, and the emergence of this group of GE engineers and scientists and others called the Schenectady Force. So I'm interested in how the recreational aspect of the mountains kind of tied into the political aspect. Apperson's wanting to, preserve the Adirondacks. How did all that work? Do you have any insight on that? How all the interplay of those different groups?
Ellen, do you want to talk about that at all?
Okay, first of all, can you hear me?
Yep.
First of all, it's Langmuir.
Langmuir. Thank you. I keep on
M-U-I-R.
saying
You
Langmuir.
keep saying Langmuir, and I'm going,
Well, I don't hear you.
Yeah, I'm
you don't
sorry.
talk that much. Langmuir. Thank you.
I think that to understand this, and not to put too much emphasis on Apperson, but both Apperson and Langmuir were so enthusiastic about seeing all the high peaks, climbing them on skis, doing everything, way over the top, new and different and exciting and dangerous, and winter camping was something they promoted, figuring out how to make sleeping bags, all this complicated thing using down feathers and fancy construction that they worked on all week, getting to go in the outdoors and do these wild, extravagant, extreme sports was the enthusiasm, and it spread. And there was an Appalachian Mountain Club long before there was an Adirondack Mountain Club, and Langmuir and his cousins were members of that. So they went on expeditions there. So the network of people that wanted to do these sports just grew and grew and grew. And it really did kind of grow out of Schenectady, even though there were people down in other states and near New Manhattan, all over, that were also enthusiasts. But that's the background, that before it was known to be a political force, it was let's go try this and do it and explore. And certainly Appy did that at Lake George. She was trying to invite people up to try camping on an island. That was way cool. They weren't doing that before then. And so for a lot of people that caught on. And then there was, how can we protect the islands that we're worried about, that kicked in.
And so is that why Carl Schaefer got interested in skiing? Because he was part of that circle? Do we know?
Well, the dad was certainly a part of the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. As a matter of fact, I was just looking through a few records this morning, and the hiking club in December of '32, their 30 people signed this document. In the document, they are essentially giving praise to Paul and his committee for defeating the Recreation Amendment in 1932. And I believe that was the amendment that wanted to put up platforms all over the park. But Dave, maybe you could just clarify that.
Closed cabin amendment.
Yep.
Yes.
So anyway, the resolution thanks Paul, but then it also thanks Vincent Schaefer, Carl Schaefer, Al Getz, and other people that Jim mentioned yesterday, but he specifically mentions that committee. So Dad was certainly involved in that group. And of course, the Schenectady Winter Sports Club was founded in '32, which was a direct outgrowth of the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. Mm-hmm. And you can't speak about the Schenectady Winter Sports Club in 1932 without talking about the '32 Olympics. And Jim mentioned that in his talk the other day. But yeah, it is very interesting that there was the Schenectady group that camped out for 10 days, and there was the North Creek group that was up there. And whether they intersected, knew each other very much, I have no idea, but it was certainly important that both groups were there, because North Creek already was interested in winter sports. They had an ice skating pond. They had built the big toboggan slide. And if you've never seen a picture of the toboggan slide, you got to see a picture of it. You could really get going down that thing. So the North Creek group, the American Legion group, was very important when they started clearing trails after the Olympics. Dad, there's a picture from the North Creek News Enterprise from 1932, and they are out scouting trails, and there's North Creek people and there's Schenectady people together. Bill Gleason took the photo. On the Schenectady side, the group of people that went to the Olympics, they ended up not only seeing Olympic events emptying out train cars of snow from Old Forge so they could have snow so they could have ski jumping. But they were out going up to Avalanche Lake on their skis. They were probably summiting some of the nearby peaks. So they were all together in that. And by the way, from the 32 Olympics, I have 16 millimeter film footage of the group camping out, all taken by Bill Gleasing. The first scene is a car pulling up, getting stuck in the snow, them unloading 20 packed baskets, which are put on toboggans, and the whole thing collapses and falls over. It's typical Bill Gleasing humor, but it's the introduction to this trip into Lake Placid. And my, I think it's my Aunt Gertrude, it may have been my Aunt Peggy, wrote a diary of the days up there. So we not only have the video footage, but we also have the diary that's been typed up. So these are, original things that we have to look back on, and we are so fortunate to have them.
And Ellen, you mentioned Lake George, and one of the, we visited the Bolton Museum, and they don't have that exhibit out right now, but they had an exhibit on the ice sailing on Lake George, and it was
Skate sailing.
Huh?
Skate sailing.
Skate sailing,
Skate
yes.
sailing.
Skate sailing, which was really, pretty amazing for the time, and to see what they were doing back then. And today we probably have all kinds of regulations on why you can't do it and what you have to wear, but it was amazing.
Well, there's no ice. There's not enough ice to do it.
But it really
you need black ice.
Yeah.
By the way, everybody, I have access to thousands of letters that were written in 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. I just sent a whole batch over to David Gibson of letters between Paul and Vince Schaefer and Apperson and a couple of other individuals right in 31. And it's this amazing window into who said what, who thought what kind of relationship did they have, what were they worried about. And so a lot of what we're talking about is documented and is available. And we have this theme now, Ask Ellen. If you'd like to find out, did Apperson ever write Carl? I could look at and try to find and send you some copies of the letters. And it's really exciting to be able to do that now and learn all the background.
I'd love to know what they were talking about. I mean, were they talking about skiing, or were they talking about, I don't know, the next, whatever the cause was at that point? I mean, the big battle back in 31, what was it? What was the big battle?
Well, in 1931, there's about 350 letters. There's a lot of writing. Everything heated up in 1929 when they had a lawsuit against Lake Placid against putting up the toboggan run for the Olympics on state land.
Oh, yes.
And that heated up so that every major club got into the debate, got into the discussion, got into exchanging ideas and trying to understand the ins and outs of it. It was a great success for the preservationists. They fought it. It had to go somewhere else, on Hovenberg or wherever it is. And so at that time, a lot of alliances got formed, and Apperson and Langmuir and others would have made inroads in recruiting people to the cause that maybe represent the American Legion or whatever other clubs there were, just scores of clubs that the officers were asked to get involved, to take a stand. So some of these conversations between Paul and Apperson in 1931 were expressing dismay that the Adirondack Mountain Club wasn't doing the right thing. And then Paul's saying, well, maybe I ought to start my own club. And Appy's saying, well, yeah, maybe you should. So it's that kind of thing. You see exactly how it was being discussed and debated, and who had the inspiration to go to, well, why don't we contact so-and-so? And I bet so-and-so would also like. And, this doesn't get mentioned, but the women were hugely important in this. Their garden clubs, the Women's Club of New York, the New York City Women's Club, Ethel Dreyer, Hilda Loynes, a lot of these women that Appy knew initially through Lake George got out the vote. And all of these women were married to all of the capitalist people that were on the side of, doing the wrong thing, of developing, of logging or whatever. So the women who had just gotten the vote in 1919 and all gone to the fine private schools, they began to kick in with a lot of power and influence through their clubs and meetings. And that's all documented in these letters as well.
Now, Jim brought up a date. He brought up the date, January 6th, 1929. And it sounded as though he kind of traces January 6th to maybe the first outing of the Mohawk Valley Hiking Club. Does January 6th live in your mind, Greg, as being anything special, or yours, Alan?
I did a quick look because I have the Schenectady Winter Sports Club book. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to get up and double check. But sure. I'm pretty sure they formed in December and they had their first outing on that January day.
Okay, so that was the first outing. Okay, great. Good.
And keep in mind that John Apperson would not have been going on to that hike. He was another 20, 25 years older.
Right.
So he's another generation, and he was very supportive of these guys taking the initiative and starting these clubs. Yeah. And if the Adirondack Mountain Club wasn't doing it right, well, go ahead, start another one. Right. So he might not have mentioned January 6, 1929, but I can check.
Yeah. So we want to move on shortly and talk about rock slicing, but I think we also want to hear a little bit about the museum and what the museum offers, what you're planning. Ellen, do you want to give us just kind of some headlines about the museum while we have you here, what we should be looking forward to?
Sure. So as you're probably aware, the railroad came to North Creek in 1871. 1871. I wrote it down so I'd say it right, and I didn't say it right. In 1871, and the train depot was completed the following year, 1872. What we focus on three major areas in the museum: Teddy Roosevelt, the ski history, and the railroad itself. And I'm going to let Greg, we usually do this tag team thing when we're doing a tour. So I'll let him tag in here on this. So go ahead.
So Teddy Roosevelt, of course, because it was on the platform in September of 1901 that Teddy found out that McKinley had actually passed away, and that he was the next president of the United States, the youngest president of the United States. And, all of a sudden, pretty much the world was on his shoulders. And, that's a very long story, and people come into the museum with all kinds of misconceptions and misstories and wrong information, but we do our best to straighten them out. And we
also talk about his commitment to the Adirondacks, having as a child gone to the Adirondacks because of his own health issues, because of his asthma.
He started coming up in his early teenage years, and he knew the Adirondacks pretty well. And we trace what we call his night ride to the presidency when he was coming off of Mount Marcy down to the train depot. And that was an area that he knew very well. He'd been up there before, and he knew Mike, one of his drivers, Mike Cronin, and
well.
David Hunter, and all those guides and people that own the inns and hotels. So, I think a lot of his commitment to wilderness preservation grew out of his time in the Adirondacks.
Unfortunately, once he became president, he never came back. He was never able to get back up there. But we believe that his experiences in the Adirondacks, especially as a teenager, really formed a lot of his opinions about conservation and the establishment of the National Park Service. So we credit the Adirondacks with having an impact there.
And there's lots of side stories. If you come to the museum, we have a display on coinage that he revised with the work of his administration. Even the story of the teddy bear, which, is named after Teddy Roosevelt. So there's a lot there.
So
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna move into the ski room. I mentioned we have three major foci here, but the ski room was the gentleman's waiting room, and we really have a very nice display of early ski equipment, from skis that probably hit the ceiling in this living room because it's pretty kind of a low ceiling. But it's, it's pretty amazing what we have. But we also updated a couple of years ago, I think it was kind of the COVID year, that we decided we were going to look into, rearranging some things and exhibiting them a little better. The Adirondack Experience donated a couple of big display cabinets they had to us. And so we moved a lot of our ski patrol history into a nice lighted display case. We have a couple of examples of early box splints that were developed by a Dr. Glenn, who was an avid skier and worked with Lois Parrott Schaefer in establishing some of the protocols for the early ski patrol, and how to make sure that when someone was injured, they were able to stabilize, immobilize a fracture and not make it worse coming down the mountain. One of our newest acquisitions is one of the early emergency toboggans, one of the sleds that they used to take people off the trails up here. It happened that it was sitting in a barn up at Garnet Hill. And about 20 years ago, when ownership changed, they were cleaning out the barn and it was going into the burn pile. And a local friend of ours, a resident here, rescued it, and it sat in his barn for about 20 years. And one day when we were talking to him, he said, "Oh, you got to take a look at this sled we have." And it turns out it is one of the original sleds. It put together with leather straps, and it's really pretty amazing to see how they, what they use, how they took people off the mountain. We also have a 10th Mountain Division exhibit that I mentioned earlier. The 10th Mountain Division, many of the local skiers, World War II happened and they needed skiers, they needed soldiers on skis. And there were quite a few, probably about a dozen, I want to say, of local men who were very strong skiers, who went out to Camp Hale and trained for the 10th Mountain Division. Yep. And then went over to Europe to serve.
Yep. And they went to Italy and fought in Mount Belvedere and the Riva Ridge. And all of them came back except Carson Freeburn. He was killed in action over there.
And of course, Draper. Art Draper was one of those early. Yeah. I don't know. I know there's a ski trail at Whiteface named after him, Draper's Drop. Art
Draper is worth a story. Dan.
Yeah.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
after the ski room, we go into the train diorama room. We have a wonderful train diorama, 96 feet of track, and it's all based on what was in North Creek at that time. And it's a beautiful train diorama. And our last room is the former baggage room, which has a lot of Delaware and Hudson train items.
The train diorama covers an area of about 12 miles from North River down to Riparius. And as you go around it, the years change and the seasons change. And when you get to the train depot, Dunham Studios did this. They did a lot of theater work. It's winter in North Creek, and you see people coming off the train onto the platform, one of the snow trains, and getting in the back of a truck to take that ride up the mountain so they could slide down back into town. So I think it's worth a visit. And I think Greg mentioned to you, we do have a virtual tour available on the museum website. So if anyone wanted to take a 6-minute tour of the museum, you can get an overview of what's there.
And is that easy to find? Just go to the homepage and it's there?
You go to northcreekdepotmuseum.org. There's a tab on the top that says virtual tour.
All right, great.
Take you right to it.
That's great.
It's definitely
we invite everyone to come anytime between May to October when we're open.
Yeah. And there's Revolution Rail is right there too, right? I mean,
Revolution Rail is there now,
great.
and they're riding on those rails. Recent developments with the sale of the Sanford line may impact that somewhat, if you've been following it. But they also have they have the lease on the Warren County line, so they will be running excursions south from the R Depot station, and they also run out of Corinth, and they're going to be doing Thurman. I run in Thurman this year too.
Oh, they are.
We have a resident artist at Riverfront Park. Gregory Tome is a glass blower, and he'll be there all summer long. He starts in May and goes to October.
He does fabulous work.
Absolutely beautiful. You can take classes, you can make something. And last year, and again this year, he's doing a pumpkin patch fundraiser, and the Depot Museum will be the beneficiary of the, which is, obviously is a big help to us as well. So.
Could I just bird walk for 1 minute, going back to my father and snow and skiing and that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, and then we're going to get into rock slicing.
We'll get into rock
We'll go right into rock
slicing.
slicing.
Rock slicing? Sure.
We'll talk about rock slicing right after. When they were getting ready to go to Lake Placid for the 32 Olympics, they were making their own sleeping bags. And they were making them out of goose down and sailcloth. So they had to figure out, how do you get goose down into the sleeping bag without creating clouds and clouds of goose down. So my father came up with the idea of using a tank vacuum cleaner to suck the goose down out of one bag and to put it into the sleeping bag. And that's how they did it. It was my father coming up with this idea, and it really worked well. So they created their Arctic sleeping bags with the goose down.
I did, and I'm going to birdwalk one sentence more, and that is just to let you know that the museum and the entire railroad complex is on the National Register of Historic Places, so that it can't be changed. It will be there, and the museum itself is one of 10 New York State Theodore Roosevelt historic sites.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary place. Great. I'll get back up there this summer for sure.
Keeps us out of trouble.
Yeah. So should we talk about rock slicing? How did your father get into rock slicing? Obviously it was from Vince, but I mean, did you get into it early on? And maybe if people didn't join us for last week's conversation, maybe we need to give something of an introduction to it. I'll be glad to show the slides at any point. Should I call them up now?
Why don't you just give me 1 minute or two?
Okay. Yeah. Let me know when you want to show slides.
Sure. So I know my dad got his rock machine from Vince. I'm not exactly sure of the year right now. My brother shared a picture of one of his lamps, and he thinks it's dated 75, which is entirely possible. I didn't think Dad had the machine that early, but that saw has a 18-inch blade on it, and at whatever point he started cutting, Dad collected rocks from all over, just like Vince did. And it's difficult to tell what you're going to get from a rock that's lying along a trail. And then the next thing is the machines do have their limitations. I now have my father's saw, and as I said, it's got an 18-inch diamond blade. It takes a rock up to about 8 inches. So you might start with a rock much bigger than that. Like when I go up to the Barton mine, Bonnie Barton, who runs the mineral shop there, lets me go up with her, and we look for pieces of Garnet Matrix. And sometimes they're pretty big, and I've got to hack them down a little bit, and you got to do that carefully because you don't want to lose the best part of the garnet. And then you get it in the machine, and it takes some fiddling around because you want to get the best side of the rocks. Depending what you're cutting, like if you're making a set of bookends, you would want to cut them one way. If you're cutting for what I think Uncle Vincent called dangles, just rock slices that you would hang in a window like a sun catcher, you cut them another way. So, you know, that's part of the craftsmanship behind it. One of the projects that I really like to make was, and I still do, is night lights. So you, instead of using a piece of glass or a piece of plastic or whatever, I would fashion a night light using the pieces I would cut. I primarily cut garnet matrix. I have cut other rocks. For example, my grandkids are teenage boys now, but when they were younger, we were climbing, I think it was Owl's Head Mountain up in Keene. And the older grandson picked up a rock and he really liked it. And I said, well, let's take it home and we'll cut it. So at that point, we were still living in Clifton Park. And I put it on the rock machine, and you never would have known that it was this beautiful orangish, yellowish rock hiding inside this beat up thing that was along the trail. So you never know what you're going to find. And it's, as Vincent said, they're windows into the earth. So if you want to show a couple of the slides, I can talk about them, Dan.
And I'll call that up. Do you know of anyone else who's doing this work? I mean, has anyone else picked up on it? Well,
I don't know if you've ever been to Stonebridge and Caves over in Pottersville. They have a couple of rock machines over there, but they use them to cut geodes.
There you go.
They are out there, but I do not know of anyone else who is cutting them in our area. So, I asked Dan to put this slide up because this is a piece of the Garnet Matrix, and it doesn't have a lot of garnet in it, but what it does have is a lot of feldspar, and you can see the feldspar when you cut it down to like a 1/16 of an inch like these, or it might be a little bit thicker. It is almost transparent, not just translucent. So I wanted people to be able to see that.
Yeah. Let me go. I'll just click whenever.
This is one of my favorite cuts. It's obviously Garnet Matrix, but it has lots and lots and lots of garnet, especially towards the top of it. And as you can see also, it's a very large rock. It's one of the biggest ones I was able to cut. It's probably 8 inches in height.
So did you put a rock on a stand there? Is that what?
Yeah, it's on like a book holder or whatever.
So you're not looking at the translucent properties here. We're admiring the rock as almost a piece of sculpture.
Yeah, but you know, it does have a hook on the top, so you could hang it in the window. And I'm sorry the light wasn't very bright. I took that picture early this morning before the sun was shining on it.
Okay.
But you would see very bright red, and
okay, so that would be translucent if the light were bright.
Absolutely, yeah.
I see. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And by the way, after the rock is cut, we use a 2-part epoxy. If it's just going to be, a rock that you're going to be hanging, we use a 2-part epoxy on both sides. It not only stabilizes it, but it also gives it more of that transparent quality.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know. Here's another one that you forwarded.
Okay, so this is in honor of the Mohawk Indians. You can see it's kind of dark, but you can see this is the clay pot, the Ganahoshalaga, and you can see the Native American figure on the left side of the picture. This is a lamp that my father made for my sister Penny. The Garnet Matrix is in the middle. You can see the quartz crystal is the white. The top is probably hornblende, and the bottom is, I'm not sure what that is.
So is that extremely heavy? I would think that's a very heavy piece.
It is, because you not only have the rock on it, you have the plexiglass, and of course you have the glues holding it all together. And there is some metal framing on the very top in order to, hang the shade.
Yeah. Wow.
So when all instead is done, that's probably 10 pounds.
Yeah. Okay.
This is a hanging lamp that my father made for my cousin Mary Schaefer,
That's
Paul's
daughters.
one of
yeah.
Paul's daughters.
Wow. So that's meant to, a hanging lamp, so that's meant to hang from the ceiling or from?
Right. I think it was hanging in her doorway at her house in Halifax. And you can see this, there's not much garnet in that, but there's some sandstones and some metamorphic rocks on the right side. This is a piece that Vincent did. My cousin Sue Sullivan has this down in Arizona. And I just wanted to point out because he made the twin snowflakes. You recognize the hexagonal structure from a mile away.
Yeah.
That's Vincent's
Well, of course,
daughter.
Vincent knew all about snow, but then I guess Carl did too. They both had this deep interest in snow, didn't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, he was running a ski business back in the days, way before snowmaking. And there wasn't a whole lot of grooming going on those trails. Back in the 30s, they would send out mostly young boys to sidestep or you snowshoe up and down the trails to break them in a little bit, but it was tough.
Mm.
They had a lot of weather to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
This is a piece that we've lost kind of the bottom of the top, but you can see the Matterhorn in the background. He used different color rocks or different shades of gray and black to get the effect of the Matterhorn. And those are buildings, you know, they are barn structures where, you know, the locals would be keeping their different animals and that kind of thing. But you can see the way he cut the rock, you get that log cabin effect, which is exactly what they look like.
That's amazing. That's amazing. He did that in rock, different kinds of rock. I mean, so.
Different kinds of rock. And you can tell that these are more sedimentary. You get that linear pattern in them.
Yeah. I mean, he's actually got the lighting in it. I mean, if you look at the side of that building, that shack, I mean, it's just amazing. He's got the lighting right.
Yep.
Jeez. Now, how long would a piece like that take?
Well, you've got to start with, and you know, I can talk about like when I was making the lamp, the hanging lamp. I think you got a couple of pictures of it.
Yeah.
It takes about 45 minutes to cut a 7-inch rock. So you've got the time factor in just creating material. And then you're going to sort through and start laying out, you know, well, I'm going to put this piece here and I'm going to put this piece here. And so it isn't like you're taking a pair of scissors to trim these rocks. You've got to saw them, or you've got to use a variety of cutters in order to trim them the way you want. And then, of course, I would say probably a quarter of the time, the rock that you're playing with is going to shatter on you because you don't know there may be a crack there. So you're going to have to grab a different piece. And so it's a time-consuming process. I wouldn't be surprised, you know, after all the rock was cut, he probably had another, I don't know, 30, 40 hours in trying to put that together, probably more, maybe 100 hours.
Wow.
This is another piece that Vince did. And unfortunately, it's not lit, so you can't get the colors inside the rocks.
So what would you say that is? How would you describe that? What piece is that? Is that purely decorative, or is that a lamp? Is there a lamp?
It's a lamp. So
Hanging lamp.
you can tell
It's a
that
hanging lamp. Okay.
there's wires coming out of the top. That would be a beautiful
Oh yeah.
light to either be hanging in a doorway or, you know, in an entranceway.
Oh wow. Yeah. Of course, that would be beautiful.
This is a lamp that Dad did for my brother Chris. It's similar to the one he did for my sister Penny, but this one has the garnet matrix on top and the quartz on the bottom. And once again, it's not the whole shade, so you're getting a good close-up of some of the garnet crystals.
Yeah, that's great. So all this was possible because of a guy named Herb Strong. And Ken Rimini knows something about Herb Strong, knew him quite well. Ken, Ken was with us a few weeks ago, and he's back again after Jim gave his insights last week. Ken wrote and said he knows the story of how the diamond, the artificial diamond technology that makes this art possible, how that came about. So Ken, take us back and fill us in on the deeper story here of how
Okay.
it happened.
Well, I can say that Herb would be humbled and honored to be amongst the Schaefer family in this whole dialogue. And as Ellen Apperson Brown had said, not only the men, but the women of the Schaefers and the Appersons and others have all played an incredible role. And so my life changed with Herb Strong. His name is Dr. Herbert M. Strong. He's my wife's stepfather. Grandpa Herb to our twin daughters, Jessica and Kristen. And it was Herb who introduced me to Paul Schaefer back in 1986. And since then, my life has been transformed, which is why I'm here today. Herb was a physicist at it was then called the GE Research Laboratory. And he started back in 1946, retired in 1973. And Jim Schaefer the other day, and I think Greg just mentioned it too, it's the first time I've heard of the GE House of Magic. So that was fascinating and to learn a little bit more about it. But in that time, back in the 40s and 50s, and even through the 60s and into the early 70s, that was a time at the research lab when pure research was being done. These incredible inventions and discoveries were made because you had these brilliant people that were allowed to go out and do their thing. And I worked out there for 5 years as a financial analyst. It was the time that Jack Welch had come in and the whole company got completely transformed. And it was just about the time when I joined there back in 1985 that Mr. Welch decided that he was going to turn the whole research community upside down, and he did, because we're in the research laboratory, 75% of the work done was pure research, and then applied research was just 25. Jack flipped it to making it 75% applied and only 25% pure. And the company, since then has been transformed in ways that no one could have imagined at that point in time, sadly. But anyways, back when Herb was there, in the late 40s, early 50s, GE assembled a team. It was called the Diamond Team of principally 4 scientists. It was Herb Strong, Francis Bundy, Bob Wentworth, and then Tracy Hall. But they were given a task to see if they could make a man-made diamond. And so then the task went on, and they experimented, and eventually by using tons and tons of mechanical force, it was discovered in 1954. It was, and Herb is credited with the discovery of the first man-made diamond. The only difference between an artificial diamond or man-made diamond and a diamond that's coming from the earth is the amount of pressure, and the variable is time. The artificial diamond, the properties are the same. People often would say, well, which is the better diamond? Well, a diamond is a diamond is a diamond. But you can make these artificial ones in a very shortened period of time, where diamonds in the ground, obviously millions and millions of years. Several years ago, Herb and the team were inducted into the National Hall of Fame, which my wife Nancy accepted a posthumous award. It was a pretty incredible experience. And hanging around Herb, he was just a gentle giant, kind of like an Edison figure. He was brilliant and accomplished, but you would never know that when you were in his presence. He was a person who could relate to you. But if you did ask him about the diamonds, beware, because you'd be sitting there for 3 hours. And over the years, we heard that story so many times that when he would have a new person, like my son-in-law one time, our whole family went in different directions quickly. But anyways, so this diamond team was really the catalyst of the eventual burgeoning of the multi-billion-dollar business, super abrasive business that GE started and launched. And their products were sold worldwide. It was just an enormous business. And from different tools to different contraptions. So if you can change to the next slide, Dan,
Sure.
please. And so Vince and Carl and Greg, who make these magnificent artworks that you're seeing, they're very thin pieces of rock. And to get the uniformity, you need to have something that can cut through it. So on this particular diamond saw that I took a picture of, you can see the tips around the top. Greg may have other types of blades. There are hundreds of them by now, but that's where the industrial diamond tips were fixed and enabled individuals like Carl and Vince and Greg to cut through these rocks at different depths. An amazing feat. And again, being around Herb, even though we knew his involvement with diamonds, I never gave it too much thought as to about, what were all these instruments and what did they actually do and how did they change our planet? So I'm going to take us on a little bit of a tour, if that's okay. So Dan, if you go to the next slide, please.
Sure. And if I don't have I know I don't have the order just right.
No, this is fine. This is okay. Yeah.
Look around to get it right for you.
I'll walk it around. It's not a problem. So we're going to go from the diamond tip saw that you just saw to this. And I won't say too much about this because I'm going to come back to it, but right behind the strand that you see there is Carrara marble. Now, Carrara marble it's known around the world. It's located just above, where is it? Trying to think. It's above Florence and just below Milan, just about halfway on the eastern side of the northwestern part of Italy. So Dan, we're going to go to the next slide. One can never go and talk about the marble unless you see a world famous structure. And we went on a Rick Steves tour a few years ago, and it's amazing that this building is held up by tourists 24/7, 365. It's amazing. This building still has not toppled, but you can see the exquisite Carrara marble in this building. And the story behind it, all of this was hand carved out of these mountains, which we're going to arrive at very shortly. And then from the carved blocks, then to take them and then dwindle them down to these magnificent structures. It's mind-boggling how they did this. And then how did they lift all of these stones and put them into position with such precision? It's fascinating. Okay, Dan, next. And one can never not talk about David, Michelangelo's perfect sculpture. And again, this is a 17-foot structure, got to see it. It's breathtaking. As soon as you walk down this hall, you see this incredible statue. You know exactly what it is. And everybody has their heads looking up at the statue with their mouths open. It is just stunning. It's breathtaking. But in this particular rock that was used for this statue, there was a fault line in it, as the story goes. And when Michelangelo went to Carrara to look at the stone block that he was going to carve the structure out of, he was told not to take the one that he wanted because it had this fault in it. And they said, you're going to risk everything. Well, guess what? He figured out a way of cutting that stone, and you're looking at the most magnificent, most perfect statue that's ever been carved by a human being. Okay, so let's head, we're going to head over to Tuscany now and to Carrara. So next, so here we are. This is in the Appian Mountains. In the background, so I'm traveling in a bus right now with the Rick Steves tour, and I just happened to be on the right side of the bus. I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at when I first saw this, but in the distant, just where the cloud structure is, those are the Marble Mountains. And that's why you can begin to see the whiteness. That's not snow. So this is in the month of May, but there it is. So that was my first glimpse. So some of these slides are a little bit out of order, but Dan, let's go next.
You want me to go down to the next one that you wanted to see?
No.
No?
All right.
Okay.
Oh, that's fine. All right, go back. Yep. So there we go. Yep, there we go. So as we're moving along on the highway, this is the next thing you see, are these enormous blocks of marble that come from these mountaintops. They go up to 2,000 feet. And there's a whole story about how they got these blocks down the mountain. And of course, then these blocks are transported today on these enormous ships. You can see these structures that have to lift these stone because they weigh tons and tons and tons. Okay, next, Dan. Okay, here we are. That's a good one. No, yeah, go back to the other one. Nope, that's okay. Let's just start with this one, Dan, and I'll walk through them.
Okay.
So we're going to get to the top of the mountain, and this is a view, an advanced view of what we're going to see. This is the first glimpse that you get when you come out of the car. So where we're going is, it's a museum called the Kawamuso Museum. It was put together about 50, 60 years ago by a gentleman of the name of Walter Danisi. And he wanted to tell a story about the hardships of all these laborers that going back in the day, centuries ago, that had to carve these mountains along the sides. And then, as you can see, some of the structure there are tunnels carving into the mountain and pulling these rocks out. And how they got these rocks from there to and down the mountain is another story. But let's go to the next slide, Dan. So here we are again. You can see some of the sides of some of these mountains as we're into the yards now where these marble blocks are coming out. They're all lined up. They're all identified, going around the world, and they sit there until they can be transported down the mountain. Today, they're done in these enormously huge trucks with enormous big brakes, because going down these precipitous roads, which have been used over the centuries, it's quite a feat. It's just an enormous amount of pressure on these vehicles. But back in the day, they were brought down the mountainside, down these steep mountains. Dan, let's go to the next slide, please. And keep going. Okay, here we are. So this will give you, I'll go back just one second. So this will give you a sense. These are the roads now that we're driving on going up. They're switchbacks all the way up to the top of this mountain. And you can see all along they've been carved over the centuries. Dan, next one. And again, here's some of the footpaths that you see along the side of the mountain, that these big blocks, sometimes it would take anywhere from a month to 6 months, depending on the size of these big, huge blocks of marble, to go down the mountain and down to the port where they eventually would be put onto a boat to go someplace. So this was a slow, grueling process for so many centuries. And so the diamond has changed all of this, and we're about ready to talk about that. So Dan, next. And it all started way back in the day with a chisel and a hammer. This is an old tool from way back in the day. So we're in this little museum on top of this mountain. And just like what Greg and Ellen were sharing with what they've done, the Italians are very proud of what they have done with Carrara. So this gentleman, again, created this little mini museum to just explain the tools and share the culture and the history that happened in these quarries. Next, Dan. So we're now looking at what these workers did back in the day. They had that hammer with a chisel, and there they go. They just hammered away, one chip at a time. Dan, next. This is the museum that should have been before, but that's okay. We're coming into it, and you can see some of the structures as you're walking in the gate. There's a gentleman there with a rock and a rope going up. So Dan, let's just go to the next one. So this is the gentleman, Walter Danisi, who to the right, who created this museum, brilliant. And there are thousands and thousands of tourists that come up here to hear this story. Okay, next, Dan. Again, this is a saw. So in this little museum, they begin to talk about the different technologies over the centuries of how they actually carve these rocks out of the mountainside in these mines. And here you can see a saw. And I'm not quite sure that these were diamond tipped. They could be, but I don't remember. I have a feeling they may be. Dan, the next photo. to give you a sense of size of what that blade looks like, they're enormous. They're like 14, 16 feet long. And what this woman is showing, they have all these pegs that they have to put into these slabs in the mountain or on the mountainside. These are the saw, as it's whirling around, has to be lubricated with water and chemicals at one time. And that's all of these different contraptions that you see there underneath by her feet that they had to put aside these big, humongous blocks. So again, it was incredibly labor intensive. There was a display where they showed two persons holding like a two-bladed handsaw that bloggers would use in the Adirondack, but these were enormous. And back in the day, if these very physically well attuned individuals would be sawing away at these blocks, if they together could cut 1.5 inches in a day to 2 inches, they were doing good. So this was an enormously slow process. And okay, let's go to the next stand.
Oh,
Yep.
are there more?
That was a snowstorm, Dustin. Okay, so so our tour guide let this museum and this quarry know that a descendant of Herb Strong was going to arrive with his entourage, and if they wanted Nancy to speak, this is my wife Nancy, to talk about Herb and the diamonds, they would. So this lady to the right is the museum director. And so what Nancy is holding in her hand, we'll get to that next, is a little diamond tipped stud. And what happened with the advent of the diamonds, the career mine, the quarries found out about this invention and they soon used it. So what would take literally weeks and months to cut, with this little invention put on that little wire cable, they could go through these big, humongous stones like butter. And now we're talking days and weeks of carving. So the productivity just went off the charts. So Nancy was treated royally that day, and her sister, Beth. Me, not so much, because I'm an outlaw. I just hang around with these important, nice people. Okay, next, Dan. So here's a glimpse of what it was eventually. Early on, it was just these huge logs that they would roll down, and these men would hold back these boulders from rolling down the hill, and I'm sure people were lost in the process. These were switchbacks, and thinking of how to do that from 2,000 feet down to sea level. That's a long way. And anybody who's climbed a high peak knows what it's like coming down a mountain. But then apparently they got oxen on these carts, and you can see these are smaller blocks here. They're not very big. And you can see what the wheels are made out of too. Anyways, okay, let's go next. So this is the contraption that eventually, this is an older one, not a new one, but it gives you a sense. To the left is a pulley system. And then you can see this wire that comes across the slab. And then in that wire on intervals are these little diamond studs, and we'll probably come to that slide in a minute. And these things would whirligig until these rocks were cut. And again, you can see how these rocks up behind it have come down from these mountaintops. And how did they get the stone from up there down to where that is? And you can see in the background behind the fence, things are mounted up. Anyways, they have a whole system. They've been doing this for centuries. It's just fascinating. But again, in all my years hanging around with, Herb, and knowing about some of the stone cutting that Vince and Carl and Greg are doing and have done, it never crossed my mind that across the pond, the happiest people in the world were the Italians, with the discovery of this diamond, and then their ingenuity and how they then developed and began to cut these enormous stones. Okay, next, Dan. Okay, and I think we're pretty much at the end. And this is Nancy's sister Beth to the left, and Nancy and the museum director. They brought out a book that they wanted both Beth and Nancy to write and inscribe some words. We have a standing invitation to go back. We did have to pay for all the marble pieces we bought in the museum, But anyways, it was one of these, as Paul would say, a red letter day. And he often used a phrase, and Dave will remember this. Whenever you got involved with a project, he would say three things: incredible, unbelievable, a chance of a lifetime. And every adventure that you took, and I'm sure, Greg, you probably heard that phrase from Uncle Paul and your father and maybe Vince. But in my experience over these last several years, and only knowing Paul for 3 years in the last years of his life and meeting Vince only twice, Carl, I've had a number of personal excursions out into the wilderness down to Ruman's Nose. Whenever you're with a Schaefer, you're in for a red letter day. So I want to thank you for letting me share, but it's going from cutting these thin, elaborate, beautiful artworks that Greg and Vince and Carl had done, to cutting these enormous big blocks. And maybe one more slide, you may get to that last one, Dan, with the studs.
No, that's a lot. That's it.
That's okay. Well, that very first one had the studs in there. So thank you very much for letting me share.
All right. Well, thank you. I guess one question: if you cut one of those thin enough, would it be translucent?
Good question.
Marble translucent?
I have to go. I'll go back and ask. Greg, do you know, Greg?
It would have to be very thin, but I think it would be translucent. Yes.
Okay.
It would certainly get light through it.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you think there'd be a whole nother business for them, is doing rock slicing and rock slicing art.
I think Greg is going to. Ellen, you're in for a trip with Greg. I can feel this.
Absolutely.
Listen, he got stopped by TSA for the number of rocks he had in his backpack on one of our trips out west. So it was.
It's a disease.
Well, I want to thank everybody. This has been very informative. We're going to, we'll get the transcript and we're going to produce a story. Adirondack Explorer is interested in this, so I expect they're going to take this story and publish it in a few weeks. So we'll keep you posted on our progress there.
And I think Dave Gibson had something he wanted to add.
Oh, okay, Dave, please jump in.
I don't know what the time frame is here, Dan.
Oh, we have no limit. We're okay.
Okay. I did want to ask. Greg, about Peaceful Valley Road. And one time Paul couldn't walk very well in his later years, and Carl took me on a tour of cabin country in his own style, and which I've never forgotten. So I finally learned the boundaries, more or less, of what we owned at the Beaver House and so forth. And then he took me down to Peaceful Valley Road, and in the evening, he showed me his incredible water feature there. I mean, it's just an amazing way that water entered the cabin from the inside. It's just unbelievable. They talk about creative ingenuity.
Yep.
Then as he talked about an Indian trail that back off that property. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, my father was pretty convinced that there were Native Americans in the area of ski land. And back in I would probably say the later 40s, I guess it was the town, but perhaps the county decided that Peaceful Valley needed to be put on it in its current configuration. Right now, if you're coming out Peaceful Valley, past the Inangor Mountain, you have the turn for Durkin Road, and that would take you over by Claude Strait Road. Well, the town wanted to straighten the road out a little bit and go right through and past what is now the Johnsburg EMS out that way. And so they did a lot of excavating, and they used the fill from our property for making different parts of the road. And so after that was done, of course, we as kids would be crawling all over that, but that predates me. But my brother Bud was up there, who was Carl Jr., and he found this interesting looking piece of rock, and he brought it down to my parents, And it turns out it was an Indian scraper. And it's perfectly matches others that are in museums that Bud has thoroughly researched this and the patina and all that. So it could be anywhere from 4 to 10,000 years old, the scraper. And we know Native Americans have been in the Adirondacks for many, many generations.
Didn't Vincent also find arrowheads there?
I don't remember, but anyway, that's a find that my brother Bud, who is now, he'll be 81 very soon. It's still one of his treasures that he proudly shows people when they visit in Oklahoma, which is also Native American country.
And you closed your talk, our conversation with you, with words of wisdom from Paul Schaefer. I guess I would just ask, perhaps in closing, were there any words of wisdom from Carl Schaefer, Greg, that you especially remember?
None that I can think of off the top of my head, but if I think of one, I'll email it to you, Dan.
All right.
We'll throw it in at the end.
Yeah, okay.
I'd just like to mention, Dan, that the Association for the Protection of the Adirondacks wanted to honor Carl Schaefer and did so. And it's one of the most very important moment in our history. And
Oh, well, tell us about that. In what way? And
I
when?
mean, it was just seemed to make a whole lot of sense, given what Ken and I knew about Greg's dad, and in the last 5 years of his life or so. And Carl came with us to Sagamore Great Camp in Rocket Lake, just south of Rocket Lake, and it was very heartwarming. It was just Greg's brothers were there, and it was an important moment to recognize him. And so I keep those photos.
Well,
Carl being recognized by a large group of people.
And I just want to throw in that Dad was there in, I believe it was 1987, when the Schaefer Trail was dedicated in North Creek at the historic ski bowl. And that was a great event. That trail was pretty much laid out by Don Green, Evelyn Green's husband, Evelyn Schaefer Green. And the trail has been rerouted a bit because when the ski bowl, when Gore Mountain put in the tubing hill and that kind of thing, things had to be moved around a little bit. But it is still a wonderful trail, and I'm very proud to be the trail steward of the Schaefer Trail for the Siamese Ponds Trail Improvement Society. We take care of 85 miles of trail, and the 5 miles of the Schaefer Trail is my 5.
Well, that's great. Well, I hope you'll join us in a couple of weeks. We'll let you know when it's scheduled, but we are going to have Kirsten Celine join us, and she's going to be talking about the DEC's perspective on cabin country and the possibility of new trails and commemorating the contribution that the Schaefers and Howard Zahniser made to the Wilderness Act of 1964. That whole through line. I think that'll be a really interesting conversation to hear what the DEC is thinking about. So we'll keep everybody posted on that. Next week, we're going to have Stan Ciafanaro, and Terry Podnorsky Rogers, the two leading historians in the county. Terry, of course, is head of the Warren County Historical Society. Stan is the Warren County historian and also an officer of the president, I guess, of the Historical Society. They'll be with us next week along with a student. And one of the stories we're going to focus on is kind of a look at maps of Warren County from the very earliest map through the modern day. So stay tuned for that. That one's going to be at 12:30 next Thursday. So hope you can join us. But we have gone for 90 minutes now, a little longer than usual, but thanks everyone for joining us, and come back again. So
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody.
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great,
Jake.
Ellen, thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great show.
I'll turn off the YouTube.